Hello, my name is Jeff Robinson from the Office of Assessment, part of the Evaluation Research and Accountability Division. I'm recording this video for you as part of your pre-work for the math framework, the literacy framework, and the disciplinary literacy sessions that are part of the leadership convening happening. I am sorry that I can't present to you live through Zoom during the meetings next week. My office is a little short-staffed at the moment, and there's too many concurrent sessions for me to be present for all of them live. So hopefully this video will answer some of your key questions and give you some information that you'll need to know about the assessment program for next year. I have set up a Google form that you can use to submit questions. If you want some clarification on the information that I cover, you can see the link to that Google form right here. You want to pause and record that down. You also will find that link to the Google form in the slides that will be part of your framework session, so you'll be able to access it there as well. I'll keep that Google form open through at least the end of June, and you can submit questions as frequently as you'd like. So please do use that to ask me any questions that you have. So today in this video, what I'm going to cover for you is an overview of the assessment calendar for next year. I'm also going to focus on some of the major changes to the assessment program and the rationale for those. I will touch briefly on the remote testing for next year, and also talk a little bit at the end about an optional Keystone testing window that's going to be happening in the fall of next year. So let's look at the calendar, get right into it. You'll notice right away that the calendar says it's a draft. We are still finalizing some details on the calendar. The assessments are set. We're not going to be adding or removing assessments, but we haven't set all of the dates yet for some of the tests. And we're going to continue to be adding information to the calendar to hopefully make it more helpful to you. You'll notice that it is a Google Sheet. We're going to keep it as a Google Sheet this year instead of making it a PDF, because we're going to be changing it. So bookmark the page and check it frequently. You can see the link at the top of the screen if you want to copy that down, but also we'll include the link in the Google Slides that are part of your framework presentation. And we did share the link already with assistant superintendents, so you can check with your assistant sup if you don't have the link, and they can share it with you. Because it is a draft and we're making changes to the calendar, if we make any major changes after next week, we will put it in the principal's newsletter so you're aware. And if we're making any changes during the school year, we'll also inform test coordinators so you can keep up to date on any major changes. Okay, so let's get my head out of the way here and let's take a look at the calendar. So one of the things you'll notice right away is, besides my moving head, we have different versions of the calendar. You can see these different tabs here. All of the versions have the same information. It's just presented in a different format. The idea here is that some formats might be more useful to different people, or different times of the year you might want to see a different format. So pick the one you want and stick with it, or switch whenever you want, but know that the information will be the same across each. I'm going to start here looking at this chronological calendar, and the organization for this is exactly what it says. It's chronological by the date of the assessment. So you'll get an idea of which tests are coming first and throughout the school year. You'll see here we have a column for the administration date, the name of the test, the grades that will be participating. We've added this year the type of test, a description for the test, a column to indicate whether it's required or not. You also see that there's an asterisk next to some of the tests, and that is just going to indicate if the data from that test is going to be used either in the soon to be released Board of Education goals, or if it's used in school outcome goals. So that's some additional information. And then we have a notes field that is populated for some tests. And we'll probably build that out a little bit, making some links to maybe some one-stop shop documents that have information, or links to certain websites that might be useful to provide extra information about the tests. So that's the chronological view. I'm not going to walk through all of those tests, but you can see here how that is organized. And again, we will be updating some of these dates that we don't have exact testing dates in there yet. The next view I want to show you is the grade band view. So the grade band view is organized by grade, starting with kindergarten going down to 12th. So if you want to see which tests are going to be administered by grade, you can scroll through and see it there. We have the same columns as before, the same information on that chronological view. So that is the grade band view. And then we have the abbreviated calendar, which is very close to what the calendars looked like in previous years. It is arranged roughly chronologically, but we've grouped the assessments together so we're not repeating assessments. And you'll notice that we've taken away some of the information like the type and the description. This abbreviated version is designed to be able to be printed, so it'll fit on a page landscaped. I mean, it'll be 2 pages, but if you fit it on landscape, all the information should fit there. So if you do want to print out a version of the calendar, this is probably the best one to do that. So those are the different views for the calendar, and hopefully you'll find the additional information useful to you. So let's jump into talking about some of the changes that are being made this year. So you'll see this tab here for assessment changes and frequently asked questions. We will also, I'm sure, I'll be updating this throughout the year as we're getting additional information and some additional questions for you. But let's take a look at some of the things that are changing for this upcoming school year. So first, you'll notice that all students are going to take a screener in early literacy, reading, or math at the beginning of the school year prior to when instruction starts. So that's basically going to be an Aimsweb test or STAR test that we want to happen as early in September as possible. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We're going to be adding some additional Aimsweb measures for early literacy and reading in kindergarten, grades 1, 2, and 3. We will also be adding math measures for Aimsweb. We will be requiring that all schools that have K-5 students will be taking the math Aimsweb tests in this upcoming year. And the DRA 2 is no longer going to be required. That will be an optional test. If you love it, you don't want to get away from that, you can keep doing it, but you don't have to do it anymore if you don't want to. And we also are removing the district-created benchmarks. So the benchmarks that we've had for years in grades 3 through 8 and in the Keystone courses will not take place in the school year 2021. And as I alluded to a little bit earlier, there is going to be an optional Keystone window in the fall. It happens at the very end of September. And this is for students who missed the Keystone in spring that want to have a chance to take it. So those are the major changes. Let me now take a little bit of time to talk about them in more depth and some of the reasons behind those changes. So why are we doing a screening window at the beginning of the year? I'm not going to read everything on the screen for you. You can peruse this at your leisure later. But essentially, with what happened with school closures, the buildings closing, and then the distance learning, there was obviously an impact on teaching and learning that varied widely for students. We need to get a sense of where are the students at the beginning of the year. We need teachers to be able to know where are their instructional needs at that point. So we want to give those screening windows as early as possible in Aimsweb and STAR to get that information to really tailor the instruction that you're going to begin doing in the fall. So that's why we want those windows to happen as early as possible before you start teaching. I mentioned we're going to be adding some additional measures for Aimsweb for early literacy and reading. So the two major reasons why we've done that. One, we need to address more of the foundational skills in for reading and early literacy. Previously we've given a couple of the Aimsweb tests, but we haven't been giving all of it, and we feel that the additional measures are going to provide more information to teachers that will be helpful for them to make their instructional decisions. So really getting those foundational skills. I know also that the Literacy framework for pre-K to third grade has an extra emphasis on foundational skills, so that's going to align with that framework as well. The other reason we wanted to increase some of the measures for Aimsweb is we have a need to be able to get a composite score for all of the grades. So in Aimsweb, there's a composite score which is used to evaluate a student's their risk and whether or not they are potentially needing to have some interventions. So in order to get that composite score in Aimsweb, there are certain tests that you have to take. And in certain grades, particularly in grades, I think kindergarten 2 and 3, we were not able to get that composite score because we weren't giving all the necessary assessments. So that composite score is going to be a more accurate way to identify a student's risk than what we were doing previously, which is just using one core test. So we identified one test in each grade that was a core test, and that's what we're using to determine really a student's tier. So we think this will, using the composite score and the full battery of assessments, will be much more accurate and provide more information. Additionally, that composite score is going to be used for monitoring school progress and district project progress towards student proficiency. So we're also adding measures for Aimsweb Math. We have not been doing a standardized district-wide math assessments in grades K1 and 2 for the past several years. We have had the benchmarks that we're doing math for grades 3, 4, and 5, but we're definitely had a gap there in not having math assessment. It's a district priority, so we're going to start assessing math in the lower grades. And the math measures that will be used for Aimsweb are going to also be the ones that give us that composite score. So the same reason for needing the composite score for early literacy will be the same reason why we need that composite score for math. During your math and literacy framework sessions, there's going to be more information about which tests are being added. So there's going to be a graphical display that'll see what tests have changed, what we're adding. And you also will be able to read it on the screen here if you want, but I'm not going to name all those different tests now that we're going to be added. But rest assured that it is written down for you in the slides for your presentation. It's also listed in the calendars that we just looked at. So that's a little bit about Aimsweb. I mentioned that well, let's talk a little bit quickly here about training for Aimsweb. So we know that by adding new measures for Aimsweb that teachers, some teachers have been giving them, but most of the teachers in the district have not been giving some of these new tests. So we are in the process of designing a training program so that we can make sure that teachers have the opportunities to learn how to administer those new tests. We will also have training also for principals. So that will probably be coming out over the summer. So also mentioned that we are no longer requiring the DRA2 test by adding the additional Aimsweb measures and also shifting focus away from students' reading levels. There's less need to use the DRA2 test. It's also a very subjective test in terms of how it's administered and particularly how it's scored. And that can impact the reliability and validity of that assessment. So the DRA can still be a useful tool, so it is optional if you want to use it, but we do feel that with the additional Aimsweb's tests and a little bit of a less emphasis on reading levels, it's not necessary to give the DRA2 anymore. The reading levels will no longer be required on report cards. More information will come out about that later, but that's an immediate question I'm sure that will come up about if we don't have DRA2, how we're going to figure out reading levels. And that's also additional guidance that's going to come, some more clarity around reading levels, what we're using them for, and how we're going to inform those. So stay tuned for that. That information should be coming out in the next few weeks. We will also be still doing progress monitoring for students who need it. Aimsweb has been used for progress monitoring for the past several years, so we're going to continue to do that. But a new change this year is that STAR is going to be used for progress monitoring. So I think previously it was various intervention programs that were used for progress monitoring, but moving forward for students who are taking STAR, they will be also doing progress monitoring using STAR. There's a little bit more elaboration on that in the slides for your framework sessions, and you can read a little bit more here. But we know there's going to be a need for more guidance on all this. Like I said, we're going to have some training on Aimsweb and STAR throughout the summer. Other changes here, we mentioned that the district-created benchmarks are no longer going to be administered. So the benchmark, the purpose of those was to inform instruction. Good purpose, and we still want to be able to provide information to inform instruction, but we feel that there's other tools that we have in the district that can do the same purpose as the benchmark. Excuse me. So STAR is going to be able to be used to still inform instruction. It's going to give skill-based information which are tied to standards. All teachers were trained in the last couple weeks of May and June in the digital versions of the textbooks. Those digital platforms have assessments built into them that will be able to do the same thing as the benchmarks, giving information on how the students are mastering the skills that they were just taught. And there are other options for how teachers will be able to assess whether students are learning that tests they might be creating or other resources that they might have. So creating those benchmark tests was time intensive. A lot of work and effort went into them. We just feel that one of the goals that we're trying to do with the assessment program is to maximize the products that we already have. So we have different assessment programs. We haven't necessarily been using all of the features in those programs. So we're going to try to maximize what we already have and then cut out where there's overlap. So we're really just trying to work smarter here with the tools we already have. So that's why the benchmarks are going to go away. I mentioned a little bit here, so I think we've touched on all of the major changes. Yes. So I also want to touch briefly on the possibility of remote testing. So I know we're still having evolving guidance around what school is going to look like next year, and most likely there will still be some distance learning happening. And there will probably be a need to do some testing remotely. Aimsweb and STAR are tests that can still be done remotely. We're going to provide some additional guidance about that and some best practices. We don't know yet about some of the high stakes tests like PSSAs and Keystones and Access and things like that. So as we get information from the state about what tools they will have to allow us to do remote testing, we'll share them with you. But again, rest assured that we know additional information needs to be shared with you about that, but we are thinking about it. We're planning for the possibility that we'll need to do some remote testing next year. I want to also touch on the fall Keystone exams. So if you did not have students who were going to participate in the 2020 spring Keystone window, you can stop watching this video because that's the last thing we're going to talk about. So enjoy the framework sessions, and please do use that Google form if you have questions for me. For those of you who did have students who were scheduled to take the spring Keystones, the state applied for a waiver from the federal government for students who were scheduled to take those tests, the PSSA and Keystone. So they have this accountability waiver. You can read more information about it by looking at this link that's here in this FAQ here, this link right here. I'm going to just kind of touch some highlights for you on what it is here. So the state has identified what they're calling a 2019-2020 spring Keystone cohort. This cohort is made up of students who were scheduled to take the spring Keystone because they were in what the state calls a Keystone trigger course. The trigger course is simply the Keystone course. So that would be any of the Algebra 1 courses, including middle school algebra, any of the biology courses, including middle school biology and AP biology and biochemistry, would also include English 2 courses. So if students were enrolled in one of the Keystone courses, and that is why they were going to be taking the Spring Keystone, they're in the Spring Keystone cohort. The cohort does not involve students who were retesting. It does not involve students who were 11th graders that were taking the test not because they were enrolled in the course, but because they had never taken the test before. So this cohort only applies to students who were in Keystone courses. This cohort of students, that they will never be used in accountability measures for the state related to their Keystones. So even if they were a 7th grader who is in Algebra 1, they will never have to take an Algebra 1 Keystone if they do not want to. And the student and the school will not be held accountable for that student's Algebra 1 Keystone score. If the student was, let's say, a 7th grader in Algebra 1, and they were scheduled to take the algebra assessment, they're exempt from algebra, but if they were not scheduled to take English 2 or biology, they will still have to take that in future years when they're enrolled in those courses, and they will be counted in accountability purposes for those tests. So the cohort's only getting exception for accountability for the trigger courses, the Keystone enrolled courses that they were in. Now, since they're not being used for accountability purposes, they don't have to take the Keystone that they missed in the spring. However, because there is still a Pennsylvania graduation requirement tied to Keystones for the class of 2022 and beyond, and that's through Act 158 from the state. The graduation requirement for that class of 2022 and beyond, there's multiple ways that students can meet that requirement. I think there's 5 different pathways. 2 of those pathways to meet the graduation requirement are directly related to Keystone scores. One is passing the Keystone, and the other is the Keystone Composite Score. So even though these students in this cohort are exempted from the accountability measures from the state and federal government, they are not exempted from the graduation requirement. And because of that, the state is saying that we must give those students in that cohort the option to take the Keystone exam that they missed so that it can apply to their graduation requirement. Now, there are other ways of meeting the graduation requirement besides Keystones, so the students do not have to ever take the Keystone exam that they missed in the spring. We will be, in some way, shape, or form, making Keystones optional in this fall window, which the state's considering a makeup window for the spring Keystones. If a student wants to participate in the Keystone and take the test that they missed, they don't have to do it in the fall window. They can also do it in the winter window next year, or the spring window, or any of the windows offered in successive years up until when they graduate. So may have confused you there with some information. I'm going to encourage you to take a look at this link. It explains it in a lot more detail for you, but we will be providing some more information to give students the option to participate in the fall Keystone, which is a makeup for the spring Keystone window. So more information is coming on that, but we just wanted to give you a heads up about it because you will see this on the assessment calendar, and we imagine there'll be some questions. So, okay, so hopefully this was helpful for you, and I look forward to working with you all throughout the summer and next school year. Thank you.